Yes, it is, and welcome back. We have a packed show for you today, not only with news and items and guests, but happy to take your calls as well at 602-508-0960. Our Attorney General Mark Brnovich is suing the federal government, the Biden administration, on their recently announced vaccine mandate. He'll be joining us in the next segment. I also want to do a shout out to my good friend and the vice president of all things important here at Salem Phoenix, Chris Llewellyn, who will be producing Pro Tem today. If you call, say hi to Chris. Chris, how are you? You doing well?
Pro-temming.
Pro-temping. Pro-temping.
Pro-temping.
Yeah, pro-temping. You wear it well. You wear it well. Let's, I want to do Mark Milley. I want to do a lot of things, but let me just start with this. It's reminiscent somewhat in reverse of the fact that the week after the election in 2020, the presidential election, we were told that a vaccine was developed and would be shortly distributed a week after the election in 2020. I see today breaking news out of Los Angeles. Today, Los Angeles County is planning on issuing a new health office order that will require proof of vaccination for indoor bars, wineries, breweries, nightclubs, and lounges. It will also require proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test for outdoor mega events, including such things as Dodgers, Rams, and Chargers games. So in other words, the largest county in California is now going back to the status quo ante of lockdown and shutdown. And it makes me think of the old Dana Carvey church lady refrain. Isn't that curious? They waited today. Isn't that a coincidence? Isn't that special? They waited till today because none of this data, of course, would have existed last week that they needed to do this or next week. By the way, there's an interesting subtle point behind all this too, isn't there? Which is to say, if California was doing right by its citizens with regard to COVID, if LA County was doing right by its citizens with regard to COVID, would they need to reissue these mandates? There's two parts to this. One, the timing after the special election or the recall election. That's when this gets announced. I'm sure there was no coordination between Sacramento and LA on this. I'm sure of it, he said sarcastically. But the other is the fact that they need to engage in harsh mitigation measures that Gavin Newsom never said would happen, that no Democratic elected leader ever said would happen again in California. The day after the election, it gets announced. Now, I know it's maddening and it's frustrating, and it makes you want to pull your hair out in some cases. In other cases, you may want to think about what just transpired in California, where a majority of California voters looked around, looked at the blight, looked at the failure, looked at the rising crime, the rising taxes, the rising prices, including in gas and housing and food, the increasing regulation, the increasing expense of living there, and to repeat, yes, the crime and the homelessness skyrocketing. And they said, all good, all good. Where does this come from? I don't know, but it is not good for a society to get used to decadence. It is not good for a society to get used to decadence. And perhaps it's something of the fault of the media not calling out certain politicians. Perhaps it's the fault of too many Republicans staying quiet and silent and keeping their own counsel, or too many conservatives. But there is a disconnect from the normal statements, the commonsensical statements Americans generally, including Californians, say and how they behave. it's a very interesting thing. How did Charles Murray put it in his book? Do what we do, not what we say, is the message liberals keep communicating. But to do what they do is to increase, in this case, crime, welfare, homelessness, drug use, rising prices, rising taxes, unaffordable housing, you name it. I didn't even mention the lack of a forestry program, which now gives California something I don't think any other state has. A fire season that people have also gotten used to. They just say, well, it's fire season, as if that's something to be normalized and accepted. We say that we desire from our children what? More civility, perhaps more responsibility, more maturity, but in our schools we steadfastly refuse to teach right and wrong. We say we want law and order, most people do, or at least safety, but we allow criminals, including violent ones, to return to those same streets, or if you're in California, to downgrade crime so that you know you get a free pass if you steal less than $1,000 worth of commodities. We say we want to stop fatherlessness, particularly in the communities that can least afford it. And yet, we continue to subsidize all kinds of behavior that virtually guarantees increasing rates of fatherlessness. We say we wish we could diminish, decrease, discourage teen sexual activity. But in classrooms all across America, now even in kindergarten and preschool classrooms, we're teaching children to be more and more cognizant of what they can do sexually. We say that we want more families to stay together, but we increase the dangers and apologize for and excuse away the very kinds of behaviors that break families up. We say we want, or at least did until 2 years ago, wanted a colorblind society that judges people by who they are, not what they are. And yet we continue to count by race, skin, and pigment, and now even shame people for being born into the wrong one: race, skin, or pigment. We say we want to encourage virtue and honor among the young, but somehow it became sophisticated to say that kind of thought is merely subjective and the imposition of morality. We say we want to recover a sense of our educational missions in life and in schools across our country. We want our children to know more. And yet, we have turned over education to the organizations least interested in student well-being, while textbooks and curricula are designed not around the notion of right and wrong answers, but around the notion of right and wrong feelings. Plato said the answer to how to create a good education is fairly easy. Have the right teachers, have the right scholarship, and teach men to be good men who act nobly. This was not a subjective point for Western civilization. It's become a subjective point now. So there's this huge disconnect between the things we say we want and the things we tend to keep voting for. And California is a perfect example of that. It has its other struggles, of course, that other states don't have. But if we thought this was an election in California yesterday to turn around increasing rates of poverty, increasing rates of homelessness, increasing rates of drug use, increasing rates of prices for basic needs, increasing regulation and increasing crime. If we thought this was an election to turn that around, it wasn't. It was an election that doubled down on it and will give us a lot more of it. God save California. We know Larry tried to. I'm Seth Liebson. Mark Bernovich coming right up.